what we want to focus here is just the first thing that we want to look at here is understanding volume versus the what we call the RSI, right? And the best way to explain this is real simple. The RSI, which is called the relative strength index, is an indicator that is just going to let you know what the sentiment or how many people are in a store. So look at this as being your chart of how many people are inside. This is your Google of a location, right? You ever go to Google and it says, oh, this place is busy right now, right? So that's what the RSI is just telling you that, if the coin is busy with people, sniffing around, and the relative strength of it, meaning the sentiment of the store, right? So there could be 1,000 people inside of a store, but if 10% of them buy, then that was a wash, right? So really what the RSI is if you think about the market on the overall and you slide down to what we call a 4-hour RSI, basically 4 hours of an RSI is going to be an inclination that people had been buying for so long that more than likely at this point that all the money that was spent on the coin or in the market that's available for this particular product is probably already inside of there, right? Because there has to be some type of end to the massive amount of buying, right? And buying doesn't just keep going until forever. You got to remember that crypto isn't a product. You're not ordering a game online or something that you're going to use, or a peach or an apple. Everything that people are buying here is getting returned at some point, except it's being returned for more money, right? So if they bought it at $1 and they sell it back at $2, they made money. So remember, everything that you're seeing here in sentiment, which is buying, is being bought for a purpose, which is to sell. And the 4-hour RSIs and the RSIs are sentiment, letting you know when the buyers have stopped buying and now have become holders and they're waiting for the opportunity to sell. And that normally means that once a coin has reached a particular price, it's probably inside of profits for a certain amount of people at 10, 20, 30, 40%, some people 100, where at that point is when it's been overbought and the odds are that it will then be sold because there's no more money coming into it, creating it to make it a higher value. So there's always an end to a pump. So the RSI is more about the sentiment of how many people are in there buying. Doesn't tell you how much they're buying. This is why volume is king, but it's telling you that there's more people still interested in buying than selling. And then eventually, when you start to see the sentiment change, where people are selling more than they're buying, this is an indication to get out of a particular coin at that time because they have started the sell off. And what I want to kind of point out here is that the reason why you have to include multiple indicators or a structure, a system that understands volume is king, is because here you can see on a 4-hour RSI that when it does start to go down, there is a big pull down. But even on that big fall down, it eventually pumps back up and tries to move again. But there wasn't enough money for it to move, and then it died off again. And that's where you can see the RSI right here would have been the ultimate time to short it. But that was literally after it almost bottomed out, bounced, and then gave you the opportunity to short. To understand that sentiment isn't volume and sentiment is just what's happening. It just that means that when the sentiment changed from buying all the way down to the bottom and it bounced up right here at this lower area here, then it decided that everyone said, oh, I guess there's no money here. And then at that lower part is right when everyone decided to sell. And that's where you see this bigger drop in the coin. So understanding volume is more important than understanding sentiment. And then right here, the sentiment was like, oh, there's a dip. And they bought, but there wasn't enough volume, you can see right here, to actually make this next push worth any money. And then after that happened, what happened is just the basics of profit taking is basically everyone that held through this first dump realized that this was the end of the money, and this is where you see the bigger pull down because this is where sentiment really kicks in, and they realize like, oh no, everyone's selling, and then that's where you get a bigger dump. But this also takes us back to what we taught you in video 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, is that there's always two moves. There's one move that starts the move. That's the moon. You can see the moon right here. And then once we have a trend involved too, we have a move. But every move comes with a bounce. And after that bounce, there is the second move. So like I told you before, guys, don't ever worry about missing a trade. If you miss the first part of the trade, the second part is normally as equal or even better than the first part. So a lot of times by being patient and getting into the second move, you're actually giving yourself better odds of making money. But this all goes to understanding, volume and sentiment, and then how to put them together and understand which one's more valuable. Now, but going back to what we're doing here, what we're trading is this. So now that you understand that sentiment just means how many people are in the store, but value means how much they're actually spending is more important. Volume is king. Never forget that. Now, to go back to what we're looking at, remember we are executing a 1 hour trade, right? And the 1 hour trade is very simple. It's the trade that we do every single time. And inside that 1 hour trade, when you have your other indicators, is you're learning how to use the indicators to get into the best 1 hour trade scenario, meaning when's the best entry to get ahead of the 1 hour trade, right? So no matter what we do, it's always a 1 hour trade. Whether or not we get into the 15-minute trades depends on very specific um, notes, meaning that it has to have volume positive on the 15-minute, and you need a 30-minute green moon to verify that the volume is strong enough to make a certain percentage of a move. Now, what you're actually doing at that point is you're learning how to get into a 1 hour trade prior to the 1 hour moon hit, right? So by using the 15-minute and understanding volume and so forth, it allows you to get to the point where you can start to find your entry. So what we're going to do here is going to go back to this trade. And what this trade actually is that if you look around, is you see there's a 1 hour moon hit right here, and then the 1 hour trend hits right here. So those are the two trades that actually went off. Now, by using our 15-minute time frame to navigate a early entry, right, we're able to locate a 15-minute moon, which happens here, and that is a push to the top. There's a pullback naturally, and when that pullback happens, you'll notice that the pullback is met by a 1 hour moon, right? So now here's the 1 hour moon popping up. The 1 hour moon has an entry that has a push, right? This little push has a push, and then from this push becomes a pullback, which is up here. And that pullback then goes into our second trade, which is the next entry of a 1 hour trend, which basically finishes out this trade. So by using the 15-minute to get an early jump into a trade, it allows us to make sure that we don't miss our 1 hour trade when the 1 hour moon hits and the trends hit, so that we're in earlier, have a better position. But either way, when you look at this particular trade, if you get the 15-minute trade, you're entering off the breaking of the positive entry, which would be right here. This would be our entry point at this point here. That would be the 15-minute entry. And then what I want to show you here is that at the end of the day, if you're using the 1 hour as your entry anyways, more than likely, you can see here that the 1 hour trade actually triggered on this candle here, which would have been basically almost the same entry point as the 15-minute entry on its pullback. So it's designed to have multiple options for entries and how to tell when they're coming. So if you just wait for the 1 hour trade as a beginner, 1 hour moon, right? It's the same entry as if you would be becoming more advanced on recognizing, possible setups and structures that are showing you that there's confirmation of the 1 hour. So when the 1 hour moon does hit, then you are fully aware that, oh, that makes sense because I had a 15-minute moon that went up and came down, and then it triggered into a 15-minute trend, which also happens to have a positive volume at this point here, which would basically lead me to say that this is going to be a trade. And the only part of that is now that you have the 1 hour moon triggered as well, this allows you to confirm that the 1 hour moon trade is happening. The 15-minute moon and trend confirm that there's an entry. Okay, so now let's go through the trigger of this trade. All right, let's say that we're waiting on a 1 hour moon. We get it. Now, once the 1 hour moon hits, we look and see if we have a 15-minute moon, which we do. We then confirm and look at the 15-minute value, right? Because that's one of our things. And we can see here that when the moon triggered, it didn't have a 15-minute volume yet. It went through a moment where it had a pullback right there. You can see this is what we talked about earlier. There was a pullback after the 15-minute moon happened. And in the middle of that pullback, that would have been the best time to enter because you're buying the bounce. So if you look at down at the moon section, that section right there would have been the best time to get in. That would have been the earliest entry point, which would be somewhere around here. And that would be you being a really high efficient trader, which will happen in the next 6 months. But just to kind of so you can understand what's happening, by allowing this to actually get above the positive value right here, above the zero line, and then taking an entry based on the trend entry, right? So remember, 1 hour moon says there's a trade. 15-minute moon says yes, there is a trade. The entry, you have to get on your 15-minute trend, which happens here. That confirms the 1 hour moon entry. So you would be entering right here as well at 42.83. So what are the steps? 1 hour moon alert. Then you go make sure that there's a 15-minute moon and you enter on the 15-minute trend, right? And there it is, 15-minute trend. Now, let's say the 1 hour moon hits, the 15-minute moon is there, and the 15-minute trend already happened. Well, at that point, you're good to go. You're going to take your entry on that point because the three things that you needed a trigger to a trade, 1 hour moon. You needed confirmation of the trade, the 15-minute moon. You needed an entry point, the 1 hour trend. So if those three things happen, no matter how they happen in any position, that's the entry. So if there's a 1 hour moon, a 1 hour trend, and then a 1 hour moon, you enter on the 1 hour or the 15-minute moon, you enter the moon. If it's a 1 hour moon and there's a 15-minute moon, you enter when there's a 1 hour trend, right? Or 15-minute trend. Right, so here's your 15-minute trend right here. So 1 hour moon is the trade. 15-minute moon is confirmation and 15-minute trend is confirmation, right? When both those confirmations hit, doesn't matter which way they come in, you enter when the second one hits. So if it's moon, then trend, enter. Trend, then moon, enter. But either way, when these two confirmations, which are moon and trend on the 15-minute, hit, that confirms the trade. Now that's where you enter. Now, the second part of this 1 hour trade is you put 50% in when you have a 15-minute moon and a 15-minute trend entry, right? So once again, the trade is the 1 hour moon. You enter if there's a 15-minute moon and trend, both active. Whichever one happens second is the entry point that you will enter. That's it. That's 50% of the bag goes into this trade. And then once that trade happens, the second part of that bag is when the 1 hour trend hits, which is right here. And that confirms the entry, as long as there's still a 15-minute moon and a 15-minute trend, right? If there's not a 15-minute moon and trend that are green, then you wait for the 15-minute moon to come back, which happens right here. You can see that the moon goes from red to green, so red and then green. And that would signal another entry right here, and that would be the 1 hour trend trade, and that's the second trade. Now, the thing about the first trade is when you enter 50% of the bag, you're doing a 100% profit take, which would basically be doubling the half of the bag, which would be winning 50% of the entire bag in theory. So that trade is a complete trade. Let's say that scenario doesn't happen and you enter 50% of the trade and it pulls back before it hits 100, and then the 1 hour trend trade comes in where you put the other 50% of the bag in. Well, then you would move your take profits from a 100% profit section. Now you would be focusing on your stop loss, meaning that as the price gets to 50% profits, right, which would be basically be half of the entire big bag, theoretically that is a win because you made your 50% on your whole bag. So what you want to do is move your stop loss as soon as your price goes from percentages goes to 30% profits or 40% profits. You want to move your stop loss to zero, so that way you don't lose anything. And then once it gets above 40, 50%, you want to move your stop loss to 25, 30% area. And then if it gets to 60 or 70, then you move your stop loss to 50%, which was your original target. And then what you can do is you can keep your take profit at 100% completely, meaning that not only did you make 50%, but you made 100% on the trade, which would be equivalent to winning two trades. So that is the understanding of how to make a 1 hour trade, using the 15-minute moon and the 15-minute trend as confirmation of entry. All right. And that is the basis of doing the simple trade. And once you get your 50% entry, when the 1 hour trend comes in for the second entry, then you will hit that. Okay. So we'll cover that a little bit more in the next video here, guys. Other than that, rewatch the video to understand what we're doing. And good luck. God bless.